My daughter Isabel told me I should feel lucky she even let me pay for her wedding, then sent me a $70,000 bill for her dream party and honeymoon. Lucky? After I raised her alone, gave up my career, and poured every ounce of love into her life, this was the gratitude I received. At first, I couldn't breathe, my chest tight, my hands shaking. But as the silence of that night grew heavier, something inside me changed. Isabel thought she had cornered me like a helpless burden. She had no idea I still held the one card that could end her fantasy forever. I used to believe that the walls of a home carried memories, that they held the warmth of every laugh and the echo of every whispered prayer. But the room I lived in now felt nothing like that. My name is Margaret Collins. I am 67 years old, a widow, and for most of my life I worked as a nurse, tending to the sick, holding the hands of strangers at their weakest moments, and giving my strength to everyone who needed it. When my husband passed away 10 years ago, I told myself my daughter Isabel would be the one place left where I could rest, where my sacrifices would mean something. That belief was my first mistake. I lived with Isabel not because I had nowhere else to go, but because she insisted. "It will be good for you, Mom. You won't be alone anymore," she said, her smile sweet but somehow sharp. The reality was far colder. She placed me in the smallest room at the back of the house, a space more like storage than sanctuary. The walls were bare, the window drafty. My clothes hung on a single rod nailed crookedly into the plaster. At night, I listened to the distant hum of their laughter in the living room while I sat in silence, my knitting needles clacking softly, the only sound that reminded me I was still here. Each morning, I woke before dawn. Old habits die hard, especially for a nurse. I brewed coffee, set out breakfast, and quietly arranged the kitchen so Isabel could rush into her day without lifting a finger. I prepared little things for my grandson, Ethan. Tiny sweaters with bright patterns, hand-stitched with love. He was the one light in the house that still reached me. When he hugged me, I almost forgot how invisible I had become. Almost. Yet, as days stretched into months, I began to notice how often I was reminded of my place. Isabel spoke to me with the polite tone you reserve for house guests, not mothers. She corrected the way I folded laundry, questioned why I added cinnamon to the oatmeal, and once, when I was humming an old hymn, she closed the door sharply and said, "Mom, please, I need quiet." Those little cuts left marks deeper than anyone could see. I tried to brush it off. I told myself she was busy, stressed, living a modern life with too many pressures, but the distance between us grew louder. Isabel's phone buzzed late into the night, and she turned away when I entered the room. Her laughter with her fiancé seemed to die the moment I walked in. She would drop her smile like a curtain falling at the end of a play. Still, I clung to hope. I told myself, she loves me. She just doesn't know how to show it. After all, hadn't I given her everything? I worked double shifts so she could have new clothes, stayed up through the night when she was sick, and gave up vacations so she could go on school trips. Every wrinkle on my face was a receipt of love paid in full. But Isabel never asked to see those receipts. She only wanted more. There were rules now, unspoken at first, then spoken with an unsettling clarity. I could use the kitchen only in the mornings before they woke up. I had to keep my things inside my room. No knitting baskets in the living room. No photos of her father on the shelves. "We're trying to keep the space modern, Mom," she said once, waving her manicured hand at the decor as if my memories cluttered the air. It was then I realized I wasn't a part of this household. I was an accessory, tolerated as long as I stayed out of sight. One evening I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. My reflection startled me. My shoulders were bent, my eyes tired, and my smile, when was the last time it was genuine? I had spent decades telling patients to take care of themselves, to fight for dignity even in their weakest hours. But here I was, shrinking in the very place I had once called home. Sometimes, late at night, I asked myself, when did I stop being her mother and start being her inconvenience? And yet I stayed. I stayed because I believed family was worth the discomfort, because I thought love eventually finds its way back. But deep down, in a quiet corner of my heart, I began to sense the truth. Isabel's warmth wasn't fading. It had been replaced by something else, something colder, sharper. Have you ever smelled smoke before you saw the fire? That was what it felt like living with her, a tension in the air, a shift in her eyes, whispers on her phone she quickly silenced. I told myself I was imagining it, but deep down, I knew I wasn't. I didn't realize it then, but the cramped little room I called mine was not just a space to sleep. It was the stage being set, the first act of a play I never agreed to join. And one day soon, the curtain would rise on a performance that would change everything. I didn't know that the tiny, suffocating bedroom at the back of the house would soon turn into the most cunning trap of my entire life. It was a Saturday morning when my phone buzzed with a notification from an old friend. "Congratulations on Isabel's wedding. She looked stunning," the message read, followed by a photo. I froze. My hands trembled as I tapped the screen wider, and there it was. My daughter in a white gown, her arm locked with her new husband's, a dazzling smile stretched across her face. Around them, guests cheered, champagne glasses lifted high. But in all those captured moments, there was one face missing. Mine. I hadn't been invited. Not a single word, not even a mention. For months, I had waited for an announcement, for the day Isabel would come to me and say, "Mom, will you help me pick out my dress?" Instead, I was blindsided by a stranger's text. My heart constricted so tightly I thought I might collapse. How could she erase me from the most important day of her life? I sat there staring at the glowing screen, willing the images to change, to show me in the crowd to prove I was wrong. But reality was merciless. I wasn't part of the family tableau she curated. I was the shadow locked away in her house while she lived her fairy tale. For the rest of the day, I moved in a daze. I brewed tea, but never drank it. Set out my knitting, but never touched the needles. The silence was suffocating. Every sound of laughter outside my window stabbed me with the reminder that I had been excluded, denied, and discarded. 3 days later, a thick envelope slid under my door. My first thought was that it was an apology, maybe an invitation belatedly sent, maybe a card explaining why I hadn't been included. But when I tore it open, what I found nearly split me in two. It was an invoice, a neatly typed, itemized bill totaling $70,000. At the top, scrawled in Isabel's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "You should feel lucky. I'm letting you contribute at all." I gripped the paper so hard it wrinkled under my fingers. Lucky. After decades of sacrifice, after sleepless nights at the hospital saving lives so she could have everything she wanted, I should feel lucky to pay for her wedding. The humiliation crashed over me in waves. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the bill, my pulse hammering in my ears. I thought of all the birthdays I worked overtime to afford, all the college fees I pulled from my savings, all the times I went without so she could have more. And now, in her eyes, I was not a mother, but a bank account. That night, I lay awake listening to the clock tick. Every minute seemed to echo louder, each second a reminder of betrayal. My body ached from exhaustion, but my mind refused to rest. I pictured Isabel's smile in those wedding photos, not a single trace of regret, not one flicker of guilt. She had built her dream, and I had been left behind like an unwanted piece of baggage. The next morning, I picked up the phone and called her. My voice shook, but I steadied myself. "Isabel," I said, "why didn't you invite me? Why send me this?" Her reply was cold, rehearsed, like she had been waiting for this confrontation. "Mom, you should know your place by now. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Your place. Those words rang in my head, heavy and sharp. I wasn't her mother in her eyes anymore. I was a burden she tolerated until I could be useful financially. I hung up before my tears betrayed me. For hours afterward, I sat with my photo albums spread across my lap. I traced the edges of Isabel's baby pictures, her gap-toothed smile at age 7, her graduation cap tilted too big for her head. Every page was a reminder of the love I had poured into her, love she now returned with cruelty. Have you ever looked back at a lifetime of sacrifice only to realize it meant nothing to the one person you gave it all for? That was my reality in that moment. My emotions spun like a storm. Denial at first, clinging to the hope that I misunderstood, then raw hurt that cut through my chest, anger so hot it left my hands shaking, and finally, doubt. Doubt about everything I had ever believed about my daughter. But in the stillness of that night, as I stared at those photographs, I felt something else creep into me. A strange calmness, a shift, because deep down a voice whispered that the bill wasn't the end. Isabel had more planned, and I wasn't even close to discovering the darkest part of it yet. I thought this invoice was the ultimate humiliation. I was wrong. The cruelty behind it was only the beginning. The bill lay folded inside my nightstand, its presence like a splinter under my skin, throbbing each time I opened the drawer. For days, I moved through the house quietly, careful not to brush too close to Isabel or her new husband. But fate has a way of pulling truth out into the open, even when we're not ready to see it. One evening, Isabel left her phone on the counter while she stepped into the shower. I had no intention of snooping. I've never been that kind of person. But the device buzzed and the screen lit up with a preview of a message. My eyes caught just one word before I looked away: ATM. Something inside me snapped. With trembling hands, I picked up the phone. I knew it was wrong, but the fear of ignorance outweighed the guilt. I scrolled through the thread, and each line was a knife. "Don't worry, babe. She'll cover the bills. She always does. She's just a burden now, but at least she's useful for one thing. Once the baby project starts, she's out of here. That room will be the nursery. Burden. ATM machine. A placeholder until the baby project arrived." My breath caught in my throat. My own daughter, who I carried in my arms and nursed through fevers, now reduced me to a utility in her private conversations. I placed the phone back exactly where I found it, but my world had already shifted. I sat in my room replaying every cold glance, every door shut in my face, every whispered call that ended abruptly when I walked in. They weren't random. They were rehearsals for this plan, my exile. The memories flooded me. The time Isabel snapped, "Mom, don't touch that, you'll just mess it up," when I tried to help with the wedding decor. The way she rolled her eyes when I asked if she wanted to spend a Saturday together. The way she'd stopped calling me Mom and started addressing me with a tone reserved for employees. I wanted to believe these were small things, but now, laid bare under the cruel clarity of those texts, they formed a pattern, a strategy. Isabel had been pushing me out long before the wedding. I stared at the ceiling that night, my body stiff, my mind racing. My heart wanted to deny it, to cling to the image of the little girl who once slipped her hand into mine and whispered, "Don't ever leave me, Mommy." But denial is a fragile shield, and truth has a way of breaking through. Morning light came, but it didn't bring comfort. It brought determination. I couldn't afford to ignore the signs anymore. If Isabel saw me as nothing more than an obstacle, I had to find out how deep her betrayal went. So I started digging. At first, it was small things: old letters, documents left in the bottom drawers of my desk. I rifled through files I hadn't touched since my husband died. My fingers brushed against a thick manila folder, one I had nearly forgotten existed. I pulled it out, dust dancing in the morning sun. Inside were the deeds, the wills, the financial papers my husband and I had signed years ago. My hands shook as I flipped through page after page until my eyes landed on the line that made my pulse stop. The house, the very walls Isabel claimed as her own, was not hers at all. It was mine. It had always been mine. My husband's signature, my name etched in ink, the seal of the state pressed into the paper. I sank into the chair, the folder heavy in my lap. My breaths came shallow, uneven. For months, I had thought I was the guest, the intruder in her space. But the truth screamed from the paper in my hands. Isabel was the guest. Isabel was the one staying over. The irony hit me so hard I nearly laughed. She had called me a burden, an ATM, planning to throw me out for her so-called future family. But all along, she was living under my roof, protected by walls that my husband's hard work had built. I pressed the folder against my chest and closed my eyes. The betrayal was deeper than I'd ever imagined, but for the first time, I felt something else stirring inside me. Power. Proof. A weapon I never thought I had. I didn't know then how far Isabel's lies extended, or that she had hidden even more from her new husband. But that night, as I locked the folder in my drawer, I knew one thing for certain. The story wasn't over. Not yet. This wasn't just about a bill anymore. It was about truth, about reclaiming the dignity I had allowed her to strip away piece by piece. I thought I had reached the bottom of her cruelty, but the documents in my hands whispered otherwise. And soon, the world would know the truth that Isabel had tried so desperately to bury. For days, I kept the manila folder locked away like a secret heartbeat, its presence both terrifying and reassuring. I knew the truth now, but truth alone is not always enough. Proof can be ignored, dismissed, buried, unless it is revealed at the right moment. Still, I couldn't shake the gnawing question. Just how far had Isabel carried her lies? The answer came sooner than I expected. One afternoon, while folding laundry in the hallway, I overheard Isabel speaking to her aunt on the phone. Her voice was proud, triumphant. "Yes, the house is ours now," she said. "We're planning to renovate soon, turn Mom's old room into a guest suite. It's all under my name, of course. You know how hard I've worked for this." My blood ran cold. She wasn't just plotting in whispers with her husband. She was broadcasting her falsehood to the family, painting herself as the architect of a life she hadn't built. I felt the fabric slip from my hands, a half-folded sheet dropping onto the floor. I should have confronted her right then. My tongue burned with words, but rage and grief collided inside me, leaving me trembling and silent. I realized that every time she smiled in photos, every time she posted her curated image of success, she was standing on my shoulders, erasing my sacrifices, rewriting history to suit her vanity. That night, I stared at the ceiling in my narrow room, and something inside me hardened. I had spent months weeping quietly, convincing myself her cruelty was a misunderstanding, a phase, a mistake. But this was no mistake. This was a deliberate rewriting of reality, a theft not only of my dignity, but of truth itself. I thought back to the Isabel I once knew, the little girl who clung to my hand during thunderstorms, who begged me to braid her hair before school, who whispered secrets about her crushes during long summer nights. I searched for that girl in the woman standing before me now, but she was gone. All that remained was a hollow shell carved by greed, pride, and hunger for admiration. The anger was sharp, but beneath it was something stronger: clarity. If she could so easily erase me in the eyes of family, what else would she do? Lie to her husband? Twist Ethan's memories of me until even my grandson saw me as nothing more than a nuisance? That thought cut the deepest. I would not let her strip away even that. I returned to the folder and laid the papers out across my desk like puzzle pieces. Deeds, wills, signatures, seals. My husband's careful handwriting, his wishes that I be protected. Isabel might have believed she could manipulate the living, but she had forgotten the dead had already spoken, and their voices were inked in law. I felt a steadiness return to me, the same kind of calm I once wore during midnight hospital emergencies, when lives dangled by a thread. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about justice, and justice never arrives on its own. It must be carried into the light. For the first time in months, I slept without tears. The next morning, I called a lawyer, an old colleague of my husband's. His tone was calm, measured, as he flipped through the documents I carried. "Mrs. Collins," he said, adjusting his glasses, "you are the sole owner. This property is yours, without dispute." Those words wrapped around me like armor. I wasn't powerless, I wasn't voiceless. Isabel might have stolen my place at her wedding, but she could never steal what the law had already written in my name. When I returned home, Isabel was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. She looked up briefly, then frowned. "Did you think about the invoice?" I forced my lips into a neutral smile. "Yes," I said softly. "I'm considering it." She seemed satisfied, oblivious to the storm gathering in my silence. From that moment, I played my part. I set the table. I folded laundry. I kept my head bowed as though I were still the burden she believed me to be. But inside, I was watching, waiting, preparing. There would be a moment, a gathering, a stage, a spotlight where the truth could not be ignored. And when that moment arrived, Isabel's carefully constructed image would collapse under the weight of her own lies. Tell me, if you were in my shoes, would you reveal the truth immediately or wait for the perfect moment to let the mask fall on its own? I knew my answer, and I knew it would cost Isabel everything. The invitation arrived with gold-embossed letters, post-wedding celebration dinner. Isabel had spared no expense. She wanted the world to see her not only as a glowing bride, but as the triumphant woman who had secured her dream life. To everyone else, it was a party. To me, it was the stage I had been waiting for. I arrived early, clutching a leather folder against my chest, its weight steadier than my heartbeat. The restaurant buzzed with laughter, the clinking of glasses, the aroma of roasted lamb drifting through the air. Isabel stood at the center of it all, her gown shimmering, her smile polished. She greeted guests with practiced charm, basking in their admiration. "Doesn't she look radiant?" an aunt whispered beside me. I forced a small nod, though my gaze stayed locked on Isabel. Radiant, yes, but radiance built on theft always burns out. As the evening wore on, Isabel's voice grew louder, her laughter sharper. She clinked her glass with a spoon and said, "We couldn't have done any of this without family. This house, this life, it's all the fruit of our hard work." Cheers erupted. Glasses lifted. My throat tightened. I waited, patient as I once was with dying patients who needed me to hold the line until help came. Timing was everything. When the main course was cleared, I stood. My knees trembled, but my voice was steady. "If I may," I said softly. Heads turned, eyes curious. Isabel's smile faltered for a flicker, then returned. I walked to the table at the center, placed the leather folder gently on the polished wood, and looked around the room. The chatter died down, replaced by a hush that pressed against the walls. "I've heard many kind words tonight about Isabel's accomplishments," I began, my voice even, "but there are truths missing from this picture, and I believe they need to be spoken." Isabel laughed too loudly. "Mom, this isn't the time." I opened the folder. The sound of paper brushing against leather seemed louder than the music in the background. I laid the first deed flat on the table, the ink and seal glinting under the chandelier. "This house," I said, "was never Isabel's. It was left to me by my late husband. My name is on the deed, mine alone." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Isabel's face drained of color. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and tapped to reveal the screenshots I had stored. "These," I continued, my voice firm, "are messages between Isabel and her husband. In them, she calls me an ATM machine, a burden. She writes about plans to throw me out of my own home for her baby project." Whispers turned into shocked murmurs. Eyes darted from me to Isabel, searching for denial, for explanation. Isabel reached forward, her hands trembling. "Mom, stop this. You're confused." I cut her off with the final piece of evidence: printed bank statements highlighted with transfers, debts, and the hollowed-out accounts Isabel had concealed. "This," I said, laying each page down like a blade, "is the truth she's hidden not only from me but from her own husband. She is drowning in debt, and she married him under the pretense of stability. The life she flaunts tonight is built on deception." Silence fell, thick and suffocating. All eyes turned to Isabel. Her hands fluttered uselessly, her lips moving without sound. Finally she sputtered, "These are lies. She doesn't understand. She's old. She's bitter." But no one believed her. The document screamed louder than her excuses. Her husband rose from his chair, his jaw tight, his face pale. He picked up one of the papers, read it, then turned to her. "Isabel," he said, his voice shaking with fury, "is this true?" She stammered, her body rigid, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I can explain." "No," he snapped. "There is no explanation for this. You've lied to me, to my family, to everyone here." He looked around the room, his voice steady now. "This marriage is over." The sound of his words cut through the hall like glass shattering. Guests gasped. Some covered their mouths. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Isabel's perfect facade crumbled. Her makeup streaked as she reached for him, but he stepped back, his eyes cold. "You've humiliated me. You've humiliated yourself, and you've tried to destroy your own mother in the process." The room erupted into chaos, chairs scraping, whispers hissing, judgment hanging in the air like smoke. Isabel stood frozen, her world collapsing piece by piece as every lie she had told unraveled before her. And I, for the first time in years, stood tall, not as her burden, not as her ATM, but as the woman who had finally reclaimed her truth. When I placed the last page on the table, the room fell silent again. Every gaze was on me, waiting, bracing. And then I began. 3 months had passed since the dinner that shattered Isabel's carefully crafted world. The papers I laid on the table that night did more than strip away her lies. They returned me to myself. I now lived alone in the same house, but it no longer felt like a cage. It was mine, undeniably and unapologetically. Each morning I opened the curtains wide, letting the sunlight spill across the wooden floors. I brewed coffee just for me, savoring the rich aroma without the rush of someone else's demands. For the first time in years, the house felt warm again, not because of who filled it, but because of the peace I finally allowed to stay. Isabel moved out almost immediately after the confrontation. Her husband followed through with his words. He annulled the marriage and cut ties completely. News traveled fast among the relatives, and the once celebrated bride was now whispered about in hushed tones. No more lavish parties, no more admiration. Her phone calls to me went unanswered. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. I thought I would feel triumphant seeing her stripped of her false crown, but what I felt instead was something quieter. Release. The anger that had once eaten at me slowly dissolved, replaced with the knowledge that boundaries are not cruelty. They are survival. I spent afternoons in the garden, hands deep in soil, the earth cool against my skin. Flowers bloomed where weeds once spread unchecked, just as a calm life bloomed where turmoil had lived before. Ethan came by on weekends, his laughter chasing away the last shadows. He never asked about the arguments or the collapse of his mother's marriage. He only asked if I would teach him how to knit, and I did, sitting beside him in the garden, needles clicking as birds sang overhead. One morning, as I watered the roses, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. The lines on my face were still there, deeper even, but they no longer looked like scars. They looked like proof that I had endured and emerged stronger. For the first time in a long while, I smiled. Not the polite, tired smile I used to wear, but one that rose from somewhere true. Peace, I learned, isn't loud. It's not applause or vindication. It's the quiet moment when you know you will never again shrink to fit someone else's version of you. Looking back now, I can trace the path as though it were a map burned into me. Blind devotion, betrayal, awakening, and justice. I see the younger version of myself bending over backwards for love that was never reciprocated, believing that sacrifice was the language of motherhood. I see the nights I lay awake with grief so heavy it pressed against my chest like a weight, and I see the woman I became, the one who finally stood tall even when her knees trembled. My journey taught me something unshakable. Gratitude cannot be forced, and love should never be payment owed. What Isabel called luck was not luck at all. It was decades of labor, sacrifice, and devotion. She dismissed it as her right, but it was never hers to exploit. Family is not a debt to collect. It is a bond to cherish. When that bond is poisoned by greed and lies, it's not cruel to walk away. It's necessary. I don't know what Isabel tells herself now, whether she paints me as the villain in her story or simply avoids speaking of me altogether. But I know this: she can no longer rewrite my truth. She can no longer erase the years I gave or the dignity I reclaimed. To those who hear my story, I offer this: never allow your worth to be defined by those who cannot see it. Protect yourself, even from the ones you love most, if they choose to see you as less than human. If you have a mother or someone who has carried you through storms, call them. Tell them you see them. Tell them you are grateful. Do not wait until regret is the only voice left in the room. Because one day, the chance to say thank you will be gone forever. And if you're hearing my voice now, if this story has stirred something inside you, then perhaps tonight is the night you pick up the phone. Call her. It may be your last chance.